stories make the world go round, which is why it's so wonderful that both of our shows have had dozens, ultimately hundreds of guests on who are sharing their stories, because you just never know how that's going to connect with that one person who sees themselves in that story and says, man, if that person can do it, I can do it too. This is not insurmountable. Your life is dramatically better when you have money saved from that very first day on the path to FI, the very first day. If you're living as if things will be rosy every second of every day, you're just simply sticking your head in the sand, and you're going to have a shock at some point. It's just a matter of when and how big. I think FI at its essence is just, it almost doesn't matter when you start, because it's the same mathematical equation. It's the same beginning steps you need to take. When somebody comes to catching up to FI, they know immediately, this is my tribe, right? And that is worth its weight in gold.
Hi, and welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, life on the journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Becky, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your hosts. We're here to help you with your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting from.
We're going to talk to other late starters, experts, and we'll explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm Bill Yount with Becky Hepting, my co-host, and today we have a very exciting guest. Brad Barrett has generously come on the show to tell us about ChooseFI, his journey, and we're going to talk about travel hacking. Becky, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bill, and I'm really anxious to talk to Brad. Brad's been a big part of mine and Stephen's journey to FI, and so I think this is just such a unique opportunity to get to come back and talk to him on our podcast.
Yeah, he's a very generous guy, and he's been also pivotal in my journey, just changed my life. So, Brad, welcome to the show.
Wow. Thank you both for the words. I'm so happy to be here. This is exciting. And yeah, as you know from the many emails that we've had, I love your show. It's so needed, and you're doing such a wonderful job and such a wonderful service for our community. So thank you, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks, Brad. And I have to do this. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing quite well, Becky. I'm doing quite well.
Awesome, awesome.
You're always doing quite well. That's one of the taglines of your show.
Oh, I know. In fact, people got concerned when he wasn't.
Yeah, I think maybe twice I didn't say I'm doing quite well, and I literally got emails by the dozen. It was hilarious.
We have to do the obligatory introduction, even though really you go without introduction. Becky, can you do so just to do him a little bit of justice?
Yes. All right. Brad Barrett is a personal finance expert, author, and podcaster. He is the co-founder and host of the #1 personal finance podcast, ChooseFI. Brad has a passion for financial independence and helping people make their lives richer in wealth, health, connections, and happiness. ChooseFI has become the go-to for all things FI related. In fact, I have to tell you a little story. Stephen and I started listening to ChooseFI in its early days back in 2017. Our oldest son suggested that he called us one day and said, I think that you'd really enjoy listening to this podcast. And my answer was, what's a podcast? And then my next question was, well, how do I listen to one? So what my husband, Stephen, and I learned from the ChooseFI podcast literally helped us define and refine our retirement goals, which allowed us to retire 3 years sooner than expected, which for a late starter is huge. We're excited to have a conversation with Brad today about his personal journey with financial independence and his passion for financial literacy. But today we're also going to take a deep dive into one of Brad's superpowers, scoring good deals on travel. Brad is an expert at travel rewards and is going to give us an actionable roadmap for how to save big bucks on travel. We're so happy to have you here today, Brad.
That is quite an intro. Thank you. And it's wild to hear that story of your son, Stephen, telling you about the podcast, and Stephen's become one of my closest friends. So it's it's funny because I think I talk to him quite often, and now you quite often via email. So it's
That's right.
I'm getting heptics on all sides.
You probably talk to him more often than I do.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, he actually worked for ChooseFI and developed a curriculum, ChooseFI 101 or something like that.
He did. Yeah, the Financial Independence 101. And he certainly helped with the military curriculum that our foundation is putting together and putting the finishing touches on. So yeah, Stephen was a big part of what we've done here at ChooseFI over the last handful of years.
Well, our audience can look forward to actually a chat with Stephen as he's going to be coming onto the show in the near future. Becky's going to interview her own son.
That's great.
All the secrets revealed.
All right, Brad. People know what you do now, but let's take us back on your earlier journey and find out a little bit about your background, your family, your professional story, and understand the beginnings of your journey to financial independence and ChooseFI.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's hard to know exactly how far back to go, because I suspect I've always been a natural saver. I think from my very earliest days, I was a collector of comic books and baseball cards and things like that back when I was a very early teenager. In fact, I don't know if I've ever said this, but my very first job, I was an assistant manager, if you will. I was like 14-year-olds. I don't know how anybody would have made me an assistant manager, but of my local comic book and baseball card store. So that was an interesting insight into business and, working for a little bit of money and some little discounts on all the comic books that I was buying. And yeah, I mean, I think I started thinking about, okay, long-term savings. A lot of these things came to me, luckily, fairly early in life. I know when I was 19 years old, and I'm actually shortcutting past an important part of my story, which is like my college selection and search ultimately. But when I was 19, I had a summer internship at it was an investment firm. It was Solomon Smith Barney back then. They've since I think been merged away into someone else. And I realized that was not a job I wanted, because it was just a sales job, which basically I saw all these quote unquote successful people, but all they were doing was essentially cold calling random people at that point, like in the phone book. And it was it didn't seem like there was any real skill to this. It was just sales. And that was an interesting moment for me. But the most important moment of that entire internship, really the only moment that mattered, was when one of the brokers sat me down in front of a compound interest calculator. And guys, this was one of those lightning bolt. When I look back on my life and you look back at the 5 or 10 lightning bolt moments, that is at or near the top, because it just changed everything for me. Because I have a natural math brain, I guess, to some extent, and sitting down in front of this calculator and just playing with all the different options. It was nothing revolutionary, right? It was just, okay, this is a Roth IRA, which I think at the time there was a $2,000 maximum, which seems crazy, but I was a 19-year-old kid, and it was, okay, if I put $2,000 a year in for the next 10 or 15 years, and it grows at, I forget, some unrealistic 9, 10, 11% a year, when I'm 99, I'm going to be worth $700 million or something crazy like that. And I just, of course, I would love to go back. I should recreate the numbers, because I don't know exactly what it was, but it was this mind-blowing figure. And I think, frankly, for all of us, no matter when we're finding FI, and I think this is really a larger message of what you're doing, what we're doing, is FI, to a large extent, it's the same journey. We're all just picking it up at some point in time, whether it's a late start or an early start. In my case, I guess I was on the early side, certainly. We're just picking up knowledge. We're trying our best. We're just learning things. We're cobbling it together. I had no financial curriculum. I imagine neither of you two did. And we're just trying to do the best we can. And you have to hope sometimes for those awakenings. Hopefully they're not negative awakenings, those exogenous shocks, but hopefully it's something like my instance, where it's just a lightning bolt and somebody somebody taught you something and it just was that click that you could have never imagined, that maybe that particular thing would have lit you up. It just sometimes does. And I think that's why stories, as I say, stories make the world go round, which is why it's so wonderful that both of our shows have had dozens, ultimately hundreds of guests on who are sharing their stories, because you just never know how that's going to connect with that one person who sees themselves in that story and says, man, if that person can do it, I can do it too. This is not insurmountable. So anyway, that is a total sidebar, obviously.
Well, I agree with you because I didn't get pulled aside as a young man or boy and get taught about compounding. You may get it in school, but it doesn't click home until somebody pulls you aside and shows it to you. I didn't know what net worth was. I didn't know to save first and spend last. I didn't know what a savings rate was. If you get these simple messages, it changes your life.
Yeah. It does. It does. And I pulled a quote out of an interview that you did with Morningstar that really spoke to me. It said, the control and the power are in your court. There is no they to complain about. And, I had to go back and think about my early years. My father's family was a total entitlement mindset. You see what you grow up with, and you don't think about the fact that the rest of the world doesn't look like this. I did my early adult life thinking that if I just showed up and did what I was supposed to do, that somebody owed me something. And then that turned into the victim mentality almost of when things went south for Stephen and I. It's like, I felt like it was not in my control. Like I was being the victim of all these things that happened to me. And I love that quote because it's our responsibility to take care of it.
Yeah. And it's a really powerful thing when you do take ownership of it. And then you have the ability, right? And I think a lot of that starts with and stems from saving money. And I know it sounds so elementary almost to us now, but it's revolutionary. It really is. This is why we're saving money. I think so many get caught up in the YOLO mentality or the, why would I ever deprive myself? You hear these deprive, right? I'm saying dripping with sarcasm to save money, but it's not that at all. It's your life is dramatically better when you have money saved from that very first day on the path to FI, the very first day, right? And especially then it starts snowballing and you see it. You both have seen it certainly where, wow, okay, this is not an overnight success. It's not get rich quick. But man, after a couple years, after 5, 10 years, you start amassing significant amounts of net worth. Bill, you talked about net worth, right? Like that becomes a remarkable thing. And when you have that first, I don't know, $20,000 saved up, think about how much more power you have in your life. The first 100,000, when you're on ChooseFI, whatever that number is to you, where you literally never have to save another dollar again, and your money is just compounding in the background. That's a remarkable point. There were all these little checkpoints along the way on that path to FI. It's not just that binary 0 or 1, right? It's not just, hey, this is all nothing until I get to that mystical, magical FI point. I mean, that would be ridiculous. It's you literally start accruing power from day one, and then it starts permeating your life. And I think that's the fun part, because your entire mindset can change. And then you start looking for, okay, these are aspects of my life or my job that I really don't like, that I want to avoid. Or, wow, you mean that's what quote unquote success looks like? And Bill, going back to your question about my kind of formative years, it was really graduating college and getting a job at what at the time was the most reputable and not biggest, but it was pretty darn close to the biggest accounting firm in the entire world, which was Arthur Andersen. And so this is a historical event at this point. This is, I guess, September of 2001. And that's when I started. And I learned a lot of lessons really, really quickly. And it was some just natural to the industry, but then there was the the Enron debacle, where there was this accounting scandal with the major energy firm Enron, and Arthur Andersen was the auditor of Enron, and Andersen went down. Their entire reputation was tanked, and the firm essentially didn't exist 9 months after I started working there. So, I mean, this is one of the most important accounting firms in the entire world, maybe the single most, and 9 months later was gone. And that was one of those aha moments for me that, okay, Becky, to your point, you could do everything right. You could check all the boxes. You feel like you've made it and that somebody's going to take care of you. And I suspect a lot of the partners and senior managers and managers at Andersen felt that way. Hey, I've made it. I first got a job at this place, which is hard enough. And then I lasted 10 or 15 years, rose through the ranks. It's a pyramid, right? You rise through the ranks, and I've made it. But as we know, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, it doesn't matter how much income you make. It doesn't matter if you're a physician. It doesn't matter if you're a partner in an accounting firm or a law firm or whatever. If you're spending it all, your net worth is essentially most likely zero, right? And you may even be getting in the red every month and quite literally putting it on credit cards. So almost anybody can spend any amount of money, I've found, and which is kind of crazy. But if you're ahead of the game, if you realize, okay, this is all, and this is not to have a negative outlook on life, because I think the world is a wonderful, safe, great place filled with incredible people, 98, 99%. I'm not naive. There's always the 1 or 2% of crazy things, but the world's a wonderful place. But yet, you need to prepare for those days when things aren't wonderful, maybe in your life because of a situation, because of you lost a job or you had some financial issue. If you're living as if things will be rosy every second of every day, you're just simply sticking your head in the sand, and you're going to have a shock at some point. It's just a matter of when and how big.
It seems like you're a natural entrepreneur. I see a common thread with collecting baseball cards. I think Jordan Germit did that. He collected art. And you were in a 9-to-5. You had little autonomy. You were a super saver. And number one, did you feel deprived? And what changed your mindset about the W-2 job and slugging it out with work every day?
Yeah. So, okay. Great questions. A couple of things there. So let me try to tackle it. And Bill, if I miss, definitely remind me. So I think being a super saver, it was just kind of a natural thing. And I wish on some level, and this is joking, but I wish I had a more interesting story, because I frankly don't. It's just I lived at home after I graduated from college, and I, for whatever reason, just internally never got caught up in the keeping up with the Joneses. I just didn't. Even at that age, at 22, 23, I saw some of my friends who were getting these jobs, again, colleagues at my accounting firm, who bought BMWs. I had at least two, it was probably more than that, people, just my contemporaries, who bought BMWs, and $500 a month, or more probably at that point. And it's just gone, vanished. I was driving an old car even then. And I just, for whatever reason, just internally never had that drive to keep up with them. It was just, okay, I'm going to live at home in service of something. So I was saving, I forget what the exact percentage was, because I don't think I ever tracked it, but it had to be 90% of my after-tax income, because I didn't really spend anything. So just a little bit of food and drink and hanging out with friends here and there. But I was able to save in 2 years' time enough for a down payment for, so I lived on Long Island, New York, which actually is a very suburban place. Most people don't realize that, but I wound up buying a co-op apartment. So in essence, just a townhome, but it's just a slightly different structure. Yeah, I mean, that was at, I guess, 24 years old. So I was able to save up, bought this place, lived there for a couple of years, and through good fortune, luck, I suppose, it did go up in value about, I forget what it was, about $40,000, maybe $40,000 or $50,000 in a fairly short period of time. So at that point, I mean, that was a massive windfall when I sold it. At that point, that was okay, when my wife and I decided to move down to Richmond, VA. So that is very much shortcutting the story, and we won't go there right now because that is a pivotal point. But yeah, I mean, being a super saver was the key to everything for me. It really was. And I thank my parents certainly for letting me live at home rent free. And I mean, that was a massive difference. And I understand how fortunate I am that I was able to do that they were able to provide that for me. So I do not lose sight of that, obviously. But yeah, I mean, that was a big deal.
Brad, did you get pushback from your friends? I mean, were you the oddball because you were living at home?
Oh, that's a good question. I never got pushback to my recollection, but I wonder, now that I think about it, there were a couple of us who were still living at home. So I had a group of close guy friends from high school who all moved back to Long Island after we graduated. And yeah, I mean, a bunch of people lived in their own apartments. And I know a couple of guys shared an apartment, and that was just kind of where we all hung out. So it didn't seem like, oh, everybody's got to come to Brad's mom's house, so that was good. So yeah, I don't think I received any pushback to my recollection, but yeah, I think it was more just by virtue of me driving out to hang out with my friends. So it was like nobody was the wiser kind of thing.
So you geo-arbitraged, actually, maybe you knew it or maybe you didn't, to Richmond. I think you still continued your accounting career, but at some point you realized that this was not for you. I think there was a pivotal moment regarding the day or the hours a day that you worked.
Wow, you're good, Bill. You know my story, that's for sure. And yeah, just to be clear, we definitely knew it was geo arbitrage, which was awesome. I mean, that was another one of those just massive moments that my wife and we grew up on Long Island, and all our friends and family were there. And it's a wonderful place to live. I mean, truly wonderful. Obviously, it's a high cost of living area, but for pretty good reason. It's no matter where you are, you're close to either the water or the sound, and you're right near New York City. So, I mean, there are reasons why it's an attractive place to live. So it was not a slam dunk for us to leave just on the face of it, because again, family, friends, great place to live. And yet we thankfully made that decision really as we were getting married. So when we were engaged, we made the decision to move down to Richmond, Virginia, which is actually where I went to college. So I lived there for basically 4 years and then went back home after college. So I knew the area. I had a couple of like tangential friends that were down here. So it wasn't like we were moving to a completely foreign place. But for all intents and purposes, for Laura, it was that foreign place. She'd never been here. It was in service of something. It was really in service of a FI life before we had the vocabulary of FI. And I think that was, I don't know, frankly, where we had the smarts or wherewithal to do that, but it was just, we knew we wanted a different life than working 40 to 60 hours a week for each of us forever. And it seemed like that, I say this lightly, not lightly, but like it seemed like that life sentence, really, truly working and living in a high cost of living area. It seemed as if, even though we were both pretty smart people, we had great jobs, we had career opportunities, it seemed like it was too heavy of a lift and the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, in the sense that there was just so much needed to succeed. And it would have been constant. There was no end to it. And it just always seemed like we'd have to give something up. And we didn't want to give something up. We didn't want to give up the ability to, when we had kids someday, for one of us to maybe stay home with them. And that would have been a near impossibility living at home on Long Island. So yeah, I mean, we picked up and we moved really right as we got married. We got back from our honeymoon in Hawaii and then just moved on down to Richmond. Yeah, I worked, I guess it was probably about, I think 8 years, maybe more, 8 years, 8 to 10 years after we got down here. I worked for the same company that I worked for on Long Island. At that point, I went to work for one of my clients, so it wasn't a big accounting firm anymore. But yeah, Bill, to your point, it was the things that I hate about corporate America and really just jobs in general, is that it's often more about FaceTime and how much time you're in the building than the quality of work you're doing or how efficient you are. And often you're penalized for being efficient because it looks like you're sitting around doing nothing when you've finished all your work, or you're just getting ahead in essence. And ultimately what happened was, and I think this is where this story will get into entrepreneurship. And I know you wanted to talk about that significantly, but at that point, so it was basically the beginning of 2015. So this is about 8.5 years ago at this point, which is kind of crazy that it's been that long. But there was just this arbitrary decision that came down from on high from the VP of our department that all of a sudden our workday started at 8 a.m. instead of 8:30. And it was just a decree. And it was ridiculous based on nothing other than just literally that FaceTime that whoever person in the main corporate headquarters wanted to be able to reach us at 8 a.m. if he needed to email. And so, I mean, that meant 250 work days a year or more. I had to just gift that company a half hour of my time. So yeah, minimum 125 hours a year was just being gifted to them just for nothing. And as you can tell, I'm getting increasingly agitated, even just recounting the story here. It just annoyed the hell out of me. And still to this day, it annoys me because, I mean, frankly, I was the top performer in that entire department and it didn't matter. It was just, we all have to come in now. Your time is being stolen from you. And it was the push that I needed to essentially just put my 2 weeks in. And I did it almost instantly, like within days of that decree coming down. And again, that is where we kind of shift into the entrepreneur story, because that was a couple years after I had started my initial website.
Yes. How did you transition into entrepreneurship? It sounds like it started before you exited, and you didn't just take a leap of faith with nothing planned. What kind of things did you do? Did you fail? And how did you reach success if you failed forward?
Oh, I failed, my friend. I failed repeatedly and continuously for a long time. But it was fun. That's the interesting thing that I find about entrepreneurship is it's so easy nowadays to pick up skills and to test things and to just try. And it's easy and it's low cost. And when you can do that, when you can maybe even reframe failure as just simply a learning lesson, not just a lesson. Like I think for over decades, we would have said, oh, it's a learning lesson. You pick yourself up and you figure it out. But in this case, it's almost like getting an MBA where you're going back to school. If you reframe it as, I'm going to pick up skills in digital entrepreneurship, right? And that might be like a bit of a grandiose way of putting it, but really websites, podcasts, drop shipping sites, like e-commerce, Amazon, FBA, you can do all of these things. And are they going to work for you? Frankly, I have no idea. Are you going to pick up incredible amounts of skill for really just your time? Yeah, you bet you are. And when you put together a lot of those skills, it can really turn into something, or at least set the groundwork, as I like to call it. It's your luck surface area. When you increase that surface area for luck in life, which I say luck in the sense that it's like a good thing happening, because I think anybody who's intellectually honest, who's been successful, understands how much luck plays in. And there are a lot of these people who like to say, oh, I'm 100% self-made. Well, BS, you're not. It's luck. Luck matters in every aspect of life. And any successful person should be able to tell you that. And when you increase your surface area for luck by getting skills, by building a network, by understanding my different options, by, in my case, creating relationships on potentially failed websites that then set the groundwork for, oh, when I have something like ChooseFI or Travel Miles 101 that's ready to potentially blow up, I can call on those relationships. And I have access to different affiliate programs that I can almost punch above my weight because I have those relationships from prior prior businesses. So that those are like the lessons, Bill. But I guess just in a fun little retrospective, it would be, I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. That was another one of those lightning bolt moments. If you list the top 10 of my life, we have 2 of them minimum already. And I just got started. I got started trying to, if either of you have ever read his book, he was drop shipping. It was something ridiculous, like French sailor shirts. And it sounds absurd when you hear it out of context. But the concept of building a drop shipping business, where in essence, you're just building a storefront and you're never taking possession of the item. You're just literally, the sales happening at your site. The manufacturer has the product and they ship it for you. You just literally forward an email in essence, and you get the profit on the difference between the revenue, the gross revenue, and the amount that the cost of goods sold. So I did that with a firewood storage rack website and
I remember that story.
Isn't that amazing? I kid you not. It was firewood-rack.net. That was the website that we had. I think I had one about fire pits. It was like firepitmart.com or something absurd. And, listen, as you can imagine, these websites didn't set the world on fire, but we made a couple $1,000s, I think. And it proved to me that, oh, wow, this is real. Like, you can actually build a business. And then I got into some wacky stuff back in those days. This was, I forgot exactly, 2007 or thereabouts. It was like a lot of like websites, like kind of keyword spamming Google. And it was just like kind of gray hat SEO stuff, which is hard to believe that I was susceptible to that. But it was like what these experts were teaching at the time. I mean, frankly, again, with the learning lessons, I learned a lot about SEO and HTML. I'm building websites and different things. So actually, it worked out okay, because again, all I lost was my time. But I built a handful of these sites that were just content farms that were just complete junk. And Google, to their great credit, smacked down all of these tens of thousands of sites and just sent them into oblivion, which was great. But I think it taught me the lesson to really be sincere and authentic. And I think that was a major lesson for, okay, then if I'm going to do anything else, because at that point I had a young daughter and I had a full-time job and I had nothing to show other than these lessons for all this time I'd put in. And yeah, you're at an inflection point then, right? Do you stop, or do you just keep on rocking and rolling? I think that was when I said to myself, all right, if I'm going to make another project, it's going to be something that I believe in. And it's something that's really me. And that was where RichmondSavers.com started. And that was my first personal finance blog. And it was actually, I think, almost 10 years to the day that we're recording this, plus or minus a couple of weeks, that I created that site. And then I very quickly put together an article where I used travel rewards points to go to Disney World. And that was that like lightning bolt again moment for my entrepreneurial career, where I actually had reached out to, I think it was the Frugal Traveler column at the New York Times. And this was just trying to build I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, so you might be getting a fresh story here, guys. I reached out to him because I read his column. I'm a huge New York Times fan. And I reached out and said, hey, are you at all interested in this? I was able to put together this amazing family trip to Disney World. And he actually responded really very nicely and quickly. But he said, I really actually don't love the credit card rewards points thing. I think it's, in his estimation, it was a negative. And there were, he had a whole laundry list of reasons. Then, interestingly enough, about like 2 months later, and that was it, right? It was just, okay, we had one email back and forth, and I could be getting some of the details a little fuzzy, but about 2 months later, he wrote me back saying, hey, I'm writing an article for the top travel tips for, I think it was 2014 in the New York Times, and I'm going to feature you and your wife and your website. And it was a remarkable thing. It was literally, back then on the New York Times website, they used to have like the most popular articles. And it was the single most popular article on the New York Times website for the entirety of that month. It was like one of the most popular articles I've ever seen. So yeah, it was crazy. And as you can imagine, that kind of put me on the map.
So you built your entrepreneurship muscle through Richmond Savers and Travel 101. When you made the leap from your W-2, did this cover your expenses, and did being FI make it easier to start a business?
So it didn't cover my expenses, and just to get the timeline, because the timeline is actually really interesting around that point. So this was then, we were fast forwarding to January of 2015. Okay. So Richmond Savers had existed for a couple of years. I was doing a free travel rewards coaching service. Okay. This is what I called it, because my site was not that big, but I got a decent bit of traffic, but nothing spectacular. Certainly nothing to build a business or an income off of for most people. But I put my accountant's hat on and said, okay, how can I figure this out? This is a problem where I believe there is an answer to it, and let's try. So what I did was, at that point, I actually offered completely free coaching to people who went to my website and filled out a form. So what that meant was they would get a half-hour call with me. And I kid you not. So this was, I'm a corporate tax manager at a Fortune 500 level company. And at my lunch hour, I had a call scheduled at noon and at 12:30. And I had 2 half-hour calls scheduled virtually every day. And I would talk to random strangers who filled out a form on my website and gave me some information about their travel rewards goals. Because at that point, so this is going back 8 years or more, really. It was 9 or 10 years potentially. At that point, travel rewards, credit card travel rewards, it was seen as, oh, this cannot possibly be real. Like, how could this be real? This has to be a scam. I can't believe it. And so a lot of it was really just trying to get people to believe that that I'm someone reputable and believable, and B, this is easy. This is something you can do in your own life. And I think just being there as a sounding board for people's questions was massive. So I guess ultimately, just kind of shortcut the story here, is I would chat with them. I'd answer some of their questions. I'd find out where they were interested in traveling to. And then I would put together an entire plan for them to, over the next, whatever it is, 6 to 18 months, to take that trip for free or close to free. So I would write them out this email. And the way that it worked for me was, I have affiliate links for the credit cards. So if they sign up for a credit card, they would naturally sign up for it through my link. So they never paid me. I was compensated ultimately by the credit card companies. So that was my real world online hybrid business that, at that point, again, I was only putting a couple hours in a week, and it brought in a decent little bit of money. I forgot, it depended on the month, of course. Sometimes some months it would be $500, or the next month it would be $1,500, or maybe a little bit more. And I'm like, wow, okay, this could actually be something. So I think if I built this in, if I actually paid attention to it, if I put 40 plus hours in, maybe I could do this. And I think that then again goes back to our story of that FaceTime thing and getting that decree, and just my wife and I being so far down the path to FI, but we weren't FI by the 25 times rule or the 4% rule, but we were pretty darn close. That in conjunction with, oh man, I've proved this out to myself that this is real, that this could be a business. What if I just went for it? There's always going to be another accounting job. I can always go back and figure this out if things went terribly. But am I always going to kick myself? Am I always going to look back on my deathbed and say, man, you really should have taken the chance and had some guts? So yeah, I mean, my wife and I just kind of got together and realized that we wanted to try that. And that was the moment. And from that point, I literally came up with the concept for Travel Miles 101 in January of 2015, essentially when I said I was quitting, and created it during that month with my friend and co-founder, Alexei Zemsky. And the thing launched on February 1st, 2015. My last day at the job was January 31st. So it was like literally the very next day. Thankfully, that worked really wonderfully well. Certainly back then, it was really a nice success, and provided enough income, more than enough income, to offset my expenses. You know, that's another part of my FI journey, is I've never had to withdraw money from my assets, because I've always had these jobs, these entrepreneurial jobs that were bringing in enough money to cover my expenses.
You know, Brad, one of the things I've discovered is that a lot of the people that I know that we would call successful have found a problem and solved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's kind of what all of us are doing. And some of us are doing it and being compensated for it, and some of us aren't. But to be successful, that's one of the basics, is to find a problem, to find an answer that people are looking for and solve it. You know, you're helping out in whatever way that is. And since we're talking about travel rewards, I really would like to dive into that. That's something, and I'll give you just a little bit of history. Stephen and I started our FI journey with Dave Ramsey, which is where a lot of people start. You get to the end of that, and unfortunately, you get to the end and think that's all there is, which is why I'm so grateful that my son pointed us to ChooseFI, because we realized there's so much more out there to learn and be more efficient with how we're handling our money. And one of the things that we really picked up from you guys, in fact, I think episode number 9, which is your travel rewards, your first travel rewards episode, I think that's the first episode I listened to when we found your podcast. I looked at the list of titles and just picked that one out, and then decided I was going to go back and binge listen to all of it. When you come from Dave Ramsey, credit cards are bad. Yeah. And it took us a while to get past that mindset and realize that we can use this to our advantage. And I think that this is a topic that would be interesting to our audience, because our audience, we've mentioned several times that we're not doing anything different than everybody else, but we've got to do it faster. We've got to possibly dig deeper and sacrifice a little more than folks who are starting when they're 25 or 35 or whatever it is. And I think that travel rewards is a lever that they can pull to keep their life from feeling so deprived, that they can still do some travel. They can kind of feel like they're still being normal while they're saving these huge buckets of money. So can you take us through that and give us a primer of what you can do with travel rewards?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly an important topic. And to your point, yeah, I mean, it's certainly a way to supercharge this path to FI in the fun sense, where you can use your positive financial habits to potentially travel the world for free or close to free. And that's a really, really cool thing. And obviously, like you said, a significant portion of our community is coming from Dave Ramsey. So this is when you first hear it, I'm sure you've been taught for years that credit cards are the worst. You should do everything to avoid them. And let's just get that out of the way, that obviously Dave is right to a large, the substance of his point is unquestionably correct, that credit cards can be extraordinarily dangerous, and tens of millions of people get in credit card problems and have debt. And we obviously, hopefully everyone listening knows that the three of us are about financial responsibility, clearly above all, and would never advocate something that would get people in any type of credit card issues. So I always say, and I repeat this 15 times, is you have to pay your cards off on time and in full every single month. Period. End of story. If you think there's even a chance that that's going to be an issue for you, or you're going to overspend because you have this credit card and you're not paying cash or using debit or whatever else you might have been doing, just shut the podcast off. Don't listen to me. Just go to the next Catching Up to FI episode, right? Because it's just not worth it. It's really not. But that said, for everybody else, or for that person, when they get to the point where they can pay it off on time and in full every month, I think travel rewards are one of the biggest positives and the most fun part of the journey to FI, in the sense that it feels like it's winning. It feels like you're really gamifying your positive financial habits. And that's just a really cool thing. So in essence, at the very, very highest level, the credit card companies give massive sign-up bonuses on the top tier travel rewards cards that essentially they're only approving for people with very high credit scores. So generally 700 or higher. So these are, in their eyes, premier clients that they're trying to attract, right? So in order to attract those clients, the customer acquisition cost is, okay, they're giving up this bonus. And that's just how it works. So what that means for me, let's say me personally, is all right, my credit score is fantastic. It's a 800 or higher. And if I want to get a credit card that has a 50,000 point bonus, that, okay, the stipulation is usually spend $3,000 in the first 3 months of the account opening. That's a kind of standard thing, let's just say. What that means is when I spend a cumulative $3,000 over those first 3 months, and it could be in the very first statement cycle. Let's say I have a large bill that I put on. When that statement closes, I've triggered the bonus because I've reached the requirements. Again, of course, even if it wasn't in that first statement cycle, it was in the second. It's a cumulative amount. So it's not like you have to carry a $3,000 balance. I think a lot of people sometimes get caught up in that and get worried. Definitely not the case. You pay it off on time and in full every month. Once you hit that cumulative amount, it triggers the bonus, and then you've earned that. And realistically, I think for a lot of people, once you learn how to redeem your points reasonably well, and of course, we won't get bogged down in the minutia, but there's plenty of resources online, and it doesn't have to be complicated. I think that's kind of how I approach personal finance and my entire life is you're never going to find me being the ultra optimizer. I don't think it's like the 80-20 analysis. It's not worth that extra little bit to ultra optimize. I want to make things accessible because that's how I live my life. You said, Becky, like you want to solve a problem, right? And for me, the problem is, hey, we're a middle-class family. We have 2 kids. We want to travel. And it costs a lot of money. And that was the problem when 10 years ago, when I put this trip to Disney World together, was exactly that. It was going to cost $4,000, $5,000. And that was a lot of money, after tax money, for us to spend. And I was able to say, oh, okay, I did all this research. I had hundreds of hours of travel rewards research because it sounded crazy to me. How could you possibly earn all these bonuses? Is my credit score going to tank? All these things that are natural questions that I'm sure all your listeners have questions. And frankly, I'm as skeptical as anybody. And I did all the research, and then I dipped my toes in, and I realized, oh, wow, this is doable for families like mine. And that's kind of always how I've approached creating any type of content on the internet or in podcasts. Is like, I want other people like me to realize that they can do this, that anybody can do this. And I think that's a fun part about travel rewards is it doesn't have to be difficult. You don't have to overcomplicate it. You can just go after a bonus, right? And you earn that 50,000 miles or points. You're probably going to get 2 cents per point in value out of them most times. So that's $1,000 in value. So now you can see how it adds up when that Disney trip, for instance, we use Southwest miles, which are the easiest of all the airline miles to use. So we opened up Southwest credit cards, and super simple. It's just if there are flights available to pay with cash, or normal flights, pay with cash or credit card, you can use your points. So okay, check. We had flights from Richmond to Orlando on Southwest. That was easy. At that point, it was the Starwood program, which is now Marriott, but they owned the Disney Swan and Dolphin on site. So I'm like, oh, interesting. You mean I don't have to give up being on site at Disney? Because of course, you want to be there. It's super easy. We don't have to be miles off site and make that a whole big issue. I can just get Starwood points or now Marriott points. And that was simple. Hotel redemptions, again, because I'm always looking for simplicity. It's like, how can normal people do this? Hotels are fantastically easy. Hyatt hotels are my favorite, but you can find Marriotts and Hiltons in virtually every small town or city across the world, basically. So you can easily, if you're looking for low-hanging fruit, hotel points are easy. Southwest flights are super simple. You can use a card like Capital One Venture or Venture X to just offset a travel expense. And that's actually the third leg of the Disney trip, which was, okay, park tickets. How the heck? These things are $400 or $500 a person. How am I going to do this? I did a ton of research and nobody had found anything. This was like my one great contribution to the travel rewards world, like my own like actual stamp on it was I wound up figuring out that you could use the Capital One Venture card to pay for Disney tickets at a place called undercovertourist.com, which is a authorized reseller of Disney tickets. And if you paid for it through them, it would code as a travel expense. And therefore you could use the bonus points from the Capital One Venture. Back then it was the Barclay card. Arrival Plus was another one, but now there's the Venture X. And that would offset that. So you could essentially get your Disney tickets for free. Now, interestingly, because it's based on how the expense is coded, if it was bought through Disney World, it did not code as travel. So you actually couldn't get full value. So that was kind of a cool little thing. And then, oh, wow. You mean we just put together a trip for the family of four to Disney for virtually nothing? And again, like, that's a story that millions of families would love to be able to do something like that, which is why the New York Times picked it up. And you realize, oh, wow, I can do this. I can, if I plan, if I think long term, which is another hallmark of the path to FI, if I can think even a little bit moderately long term, which in that case was basically 12 to 18 months. It's not that long term, right? I can take a trip for nearly free. That is just it's a big thing. And that can make the difference in a family maybe never being able to afford to go, or you could probably put that trip together every 3 or 4 years and really get it for close to free. So hopefully that I'm painting the picture here and giving some tactical things on the how and why of travel rewards.
Yeah, I did this for a year or so and I got overwhelmed. All these credit cards flying around, going through, and I garnered a lot of points, but it was hard to keep track of. And I imagine organization is key. So instead of succumbing to the overwhelm, I decided on sort of a more simple approach for us. And we went with the Chase Preferred as ultimate rewards. And we had 2 business cards. So we can consolidate our miles from 3 cards. And over the last couple of years, we've garnered 750,000 points. We're going to use them to upgrade to business class on a trip because we're 57 and we need to lay down. So there's other things you can do with this, but we keep it to the Chase Ultimate Rewards program. And in our location, we only have United, American, and Delta. We don't have Southwest. So it is location dependent. There's access and flexibility issues in order to garner the most value for your points. You have to look at other hacks to it so that you don't use as many points as the high-end points in order to maximize your points. Do you have any other suggestions for how to maximize points or other cards or concepts that help people simplify this a little bit? Because I'm not a spreadsheet person. I'm not as organized as Becky.
Well, yeah, and I don't think you need to devote a lot of time to it. I really truly don't. I think there are simple ways to do this, and it's always a sliding scale of really the simpler is the potentially less optimal value you're going to get, but you're still going to kill it. It's going to be fantastic, right? Like, so that's the cool thing is even just the worst case scenario. Like I said, a card like the Venture or Venture X, a card like the Capital One Venture or Venture X that I talked about, you can just offset a travel expense that you paid for with that credit card. So talk about the simplest thing ever, right? It's just nobody knows or cares you have points. You're literally just using that as your form of payment. And then when it codes as travel, which it does in 99% of the cases, certainly if you use it for any normal travel place, online websites, Kayak, Travelocity, any of the hotels or airlines, it's going to code as travel. And then you just log into your Capital One account and you essentially use those points to erase a portion of that expense or all of it if you have enough points. So that couldn't be easier. You mentioned the Chase Sapphire Preferred and ultimately the Chase Ultimate Rewards points, which are my favorite of all the points. I mean, if you wanted to just do the simple version, because this sounds overwhelming to you, well, there are 2 really simple versions. The first is just for 1 cent per point, you can get a check mailed to you. Very simply. So, Bill, you have 750,000. You could get a check for $7,500 just mailed to you tomorrow. Plain and simple, end of story. That is the most brain dead version of this, the lowest value, but who's going to have a problem with getting $7,500 mailed to them, right? Probably just about nobody. But then the step up from that is, okay, Chase has a travel portal, which I forget who runs it, but it's one of the major, Travelocity or something like that. But so it's essentially using that website just under the Chase name and under your login So, hey, I'm looking for flights or hotels or a trip. I just mock it up there and I book it and I pay for it with my points. Well, there, if you have the Sapphire Preferred, you get, and this is currently when we're recording this in June 1st of 2023, but you get 1.25 cents per point. So you get 25 cents more, 25% more value, right? Or if you had the Sapphire Reserve, you would actually get 1.5 cents per point. So you'd get 50% more value from using that type of redemption. So those are simple. Bill, I mean, to your point, you don't need a spreadsheet to do that. You just need to use a travel search, right? Like that is fantastic and incredibly easy. And then obviously the most potentially valuable is where the degree of difficulty could potentially go up, but it still could be quite easy, is having those Chase points. And I'm focusing here on Chase because this is an example of the transferable currencies. So Amex has their own membership rewards points. Actually, Capital One, those Capital One miles that I talked about, they are now transferable, which is cool. And Citi thank you points are transferable. So I'm just using Chase as the easiest way to describe this. But you can transfer them. I think they have just north of a dozen transfer partners, but I like to focus on 4 in particular. So Hyatt Hotels, I mentioned earlier, is an amazing way to get extreme value if you want a luxury trip, because their award chart is really very reasonable. Whereas if you look at a like a Marriott or a Hilton, and of course these are different currencies, so let's be real that it's not supposed to be a 1-to-1. If you look at Chase Ultimate Rewards transfers, because what you can do is you can transfer these miles to become points or miles in those other partners' accounts. So they can become Hyatt points, they can become United miles or Marriott points or British Airways miles, etc. So they live in your Chase account, but then when you want to transfer them, they can become those other things, and then you can get the redemptions through those programs. So now what I was saying about Hyatt is, I think the last check, and I could be wrong with they may have changed their award chart since I most recently checked, but I think it was for like the most expensive Hyatt hotel in the world, like the Park Hyatt New York City or the Park Hyatt in Tokyo or Paris. It was only like 35,000 points a night. And again, it may have changed ever so slightly, but it's not that far off. But you can get an unbelievable hotel, like a category 6 hotel, for 25,000 points a night. I'm actually taking my youngest daughter on a trip to New York City in August, and we booked this little chic boutique hotel in New York City for 25,000 Hyatt points a night. And it's just like this amazing thing. If I had transferred 25,000 points to Marriott, that would get you like a Fairfield Inn in Fayetteville, North Carolina, or something like that. It's not the same. And so there's a ton of value in Hyatt. So Bill, for you, with all those Ultimate Rewards points, Hyatt is so easy. That is one of the simplest things you could possibly do. You transfer the exact amount of points you need. It transfers instantly. You just log out and log back into your account at Hyatt, and you have already checked that the award availability is there. And then you just book the thing. It can all be done in 5 minutes, and it's zero cost. Generally, I think 99.9% of hotels, there are no fees or taxes. It's literally $0. So it's a cool thing. And another reason why I like hotel rewards is you can get an extreme amount of value by, I like to say, so I speculatively booked a Hyatt in Pittsburgh in a couple of weeks for a Taylor Swift concert that I'm hoping to take my daughter to. So it was, and the cool thing is, because it's an award chart, it only costs 15,000 points per night, regardless of whether it's the slowest Tuesday in February or it's the weekend of the Super Bowl or Taylor Swift, right? So it doesn't matter if the hotel's cash price is $100 that night, or in the case of Taylor Swift, $800 or $900 a night. It's still the same 15,000 points. So you can get a ton of value there. I'm talking, actually, Becky, I might go to Omaha with your son, Steven, next year for the Berkshire Hathaway event. I'm going to speculatively book that because there's no reason not to. There's a Hyatt in Omaha. There's no reason not to book the thing, because the worst that happens is I cancel it and I get all my points back, and it literally zero cost. So it's just the opportunity cost of essentially having those points tied up. But the upside is, man, that thing would have cost $700 a night during the Berkshire event. So hopefully, again, I'm trying to paint this picture of there are really, really easy ways to do this. United is another easy one. Because again, like you can try to maximize, or you could just go to united.com, click use miles, and mock up a flight from wherever your city is to Paris. And you'll find, hey, there might be a flight for 30,000 miles one way on this Tuesday and that Wednesday coming home. But if I wanted to do it on the next days, it might have been a little more, a little less. And you just play with it. It's kind of fun. You just sit there for 10 minutes and just mock it up and see what happens. And then, of course, you can go down the rabbit hole and it gets crazy, and you can use British Airways miles to get amazing value on American Airlines. And I did that for my trip to New York City. But honestly, like that's way more difficult. And I wouldn't advise your listeners to get started with that right away. But they could just Google how to use British Airways Avios miles for American Airlines flights, and somebody's going to have a step-by-step tutorial. So you can pretty much, as long as you know what question to ask, you can pretty much find the answer on Google just for anything in the world, right?
It sounds like you just increase your income in a non-taxable way here.
You betcha, my friend. You absolutely can. And I think most people in the FI community can pretty much take one trip per year, plus or minus, for free or close to free, by just being smart about this and planning ahead and just start earning these points. So yeah, it's a pretty wonderful way to, yeah, like you said, get a raise, a tax-free raise basically in your life, and do something fun in the process. It feels, I know we always say money is fungible, right? Money is money, but like, man, it feels good to get a free trip. I'm not going to lie. It feels fantastic.
Stephen and I have used the Sapphire Preferred and Sapphire Reserve. I've got Preferred. He has Reserve. We have used it mainly for United and Southwest flights and for Hyatt hotels. And I haven't done it recently, but I used to keep a log just out of curiosity of how much money I had saved by using points. And it's been thousands of dollars. Could you give us just a 30,000-foot view of the Southwest Airlines Companion Pass? Because Stephen and I have used that a ton.
Yeah, this is a fun one. And this is one of those that just feels amazing when you earn it. And I think the details now, I believe, are when one Southwest account earns 125,000 miles in a calendar year, it triggers that you've earned a companion pass. Okay. And what is really nice about this is the companion pass is good through December 31st of the following calendar year. So you can see if you could somehow manage to do that in a January or February time period to earn those 125,000 miles, well, you can have this companion pass for 22, 23, 24 months, something like that, somewhere in that vicinity. Basically, you can then take a companion with you for free on rewards flights or cash flights. It's just a super cool thing. I think they have to pay like the normal, what is it, $5.60 in fees. So it's $11.20 round trip. But I kind of round that down to free. I think most reasonable people do. I mean, Southwest has a remarkable network. It's obviously one of the biggest airlines in America. And if you live near a Southwest hub, or if you have even just a reasonable Southwest presence at your local airport, which you can always just find on the Wikipedia page. That's kind of another little tip and trick, is just Google your city airport wiki. So for me, it's Richmond Airport Wiki. And every airport in the world has a wiki page that has airlines and destinations. You just scroll down to that section and you can see what airlines are at your local airport and what type of presence. Literally, it's how much real estate it takes up. You can tell pretty obviously. Like if you Google Newark Airport Wiki, you're going to see United, and then it's going to be 5 inches of different destinations because that's one of their hubs. So you can quickly at a glance figure out, okay, what airlines are available in my airport. So yeah, the companion pass is pretty remarkable, and you can earn the 125,000 miles. Sounds crazy, but if you open up a Southwest personal card and a Southwest business card in that same calendar year, in most cases, and again, I don't know what the bonuses are now, they kind of shift from time to time, but they're usually at least 50,000 miles each. And then you have all the spendings, maybe sometimes there's 60,000. So if you have a 60,000 mile bonus on each, you're at 120,000 miles plus the spending requirement. You're almost certainly going to hit that 125 right there, and it will trigger that companion pass, and then you'll have it. So naturally, you want to be able to do that ideally in the beginning of the year, as I mentioned. So you might want to open those cards in December, let's say. The optimal strategy would be to open them, I think, probably early to mid-December, and then have all the points hit in your account in January, February, March, and then get 21 to 23 months of the companion pass. So you can see how you can really, really maximize, because then you haven't given up those miles. It's not like you had to pay 125,000 miles to pay for the companion pass. No. They just gave that to you as a bonus. You still have the 125,000 miles. You then can use all those miles and essentially double them up. So really, by doing this strategy, maybe opening 2 of those credit cards, you get what amounts to 250,000 miles worth of value, potentially from 2 credit cards, which is really, really cool.
That's what Stephen and I have done. We live outside of Colorado Springs, and when we moved here, Southwest flew out of Denver. Since then, they have added Colorado Springs. So literally, Stephen and I have not paid for an airline ticket for years. And what we do is we will switch back and forth. I opened the cards this year. So I have the companion pass. He's the companion. I'm the companion pass holder. And we have it through the end of next year. And at the end of next year, then he will open 2 cards. And so we sort of switch back and forth. So, one other thing could you just real quickly go through what 524 means?
Yeah, I guess so. Right. This is important, but kind of veering into the little weeds here with the details, but it is so important. I'm glad you asked, which is basically in my estimation, at least, most of the top tier credit cards for travel rewards are Chase cards. So you want to be able to essentially get approved for Chase cards. And what they've done, again, to their great credit, is they understand that a lot of people were gaming the system with this and just opening up dozens of cards and just doing crazy stuff. And I mean, they're looking for really long-term customers and partners. So a lot of the credit card companies have instituted rules to cut down on that. Amex put in a quote unquote once per lifetime per card rule, which I think is a little bit fuzzy, but it's directionally accurate. And Chase basically said, if you have been approved for 5 cards in the last 24 months, so that's the 524, and that's not just from Chase, but that's from any bank, basically. There's some carve outs, and this is not the time to talk about all the tiny little carve outs. You can Google that, but it's important to know that basically, if you've been approved for 5 cards in the last 24 months and you go to apply for the 6th card from Chase, they're just going to auto reject you because they're going to realize you're just essentially gaming the system. So you need to, especially when you get started with this, you need to really, really manage the number of cards you open and the specific banks that you open them from, because you wouldn't want to rule yourself out basically from getting Chase cards by kind of stupidly opening cards from other banks or haphazardly opening cards and missing out potentially on some of these bonuses that we talked about, which are remarkable, like the Southwest cards, which can get you, those are Chase cards, which can get you this companion pass, or the Chase Sapphire Preferred or Reserve, or the United cards, or whatever, British Airways cards. They have so many cards. You just need to be very, very mindful of which order you open. And it sounds more difficult than it actually winds up being in practice. It's just something to remember, and then to potentially Google, because this might be, for your listeners, this might be 6 months or a year from now when they're getting started and they come back to this episode, and just Google and find out what the latest state of the 524 rule is at that point.
Right. I wanted to point out, all of us get credit card offers in the mail every other day. Our mailboxes are full of that. And so the thing that people want to really be aware of is to make a plan, just like we do with our money. If you want to do travel rewards, they're out there to be had, and they have a great value. But don't just send in the application that you got in the mail yesterday to get whatever that card was. You need a plan as to which ones are going to be useful for you.
Agreed. Totally agreed. And yeah, that again, because we're not trying to get bogged down in all the little weeds, is like, and Bill, to your question before of, this can get confusing, and It can. And that's why I don't want to talk about, okay, let's find out precisely how to maximize every single bonus. But to Becky's really intelligent point is, okay, you're going to get a lot of these offers in the mail. You don't know if they're substandard or if they're fantastic. Just Google it. Google is your best friend in this. You don't have to try to figure anything out or just like fly blind. Just Google it. Hey, I got this offer for 60,000 miles on the United card. Is that a good offer? Okay. You might find out that's the best offer in the last year really quickly, or you might find out that there's currently an 80,000 point bonus publicly, and then therefore the one they sent you is complete junk. So there are a lot of resources. We have a ton at ChooseFI.com/travel. So we have a lot of travel rewards episodes. I'm actually recording one in a couple of days that's going to come out here in the next couple of weeks, which probably will be almost simultaneous with when this comes out. Yeah, we just try to keep it updated, and we have a cards page where we have the best public offers. So yeah, we try to do our best to keep it updated without overwhelming people, basically.
Brad, you have so much to offer us, and we've talked a lot about travel rewards. I'm going to extend the show just a little bit because I think our audience is fascinated about ChooseFI, its origins, its growth. And I want to talk a little bit about that, the origin story. We got up to your point of entrepreneurship, taking the leap, going through Richmond rewards and Travel 101. Where did the idea for ChooseFI come from? And take us on the journey a little bit so that we understand the exponential growth of this movement.
Yeah, so it's been a wild ride. It's still hard to believe to this day, even though it's 6.5 years. And I guess basically the real kind of origin story is I was on. So when I had Travel Miles 101, I was actually on the Mad Scientist podcast, talking about travel rewards. And this random guy, Jonathan, who was listening to that podcast, who lived in Richmond, Virginia, was into travel rewards and was into financial independence, heard me talking on the show, and he's like, oh wow, this guy Brad also lives in Richmond, is into FI and is into travel rewards. And he just reached out to me just randomly through my contact page. Forget if it was on Richmond Savers or Travel Miles 101, and just kind of said, hey, I'd love to get together or have a cup of coffee or lunch or something. And for whatever reason, I just said yes. And we went and grabbed hamburgers. As you both know, since you've listened to the podcast for years, Jonathan talked a mile a minute, and I probably spoke maybe 1 or 2% of the time, and he talked the other 99. He was just an interesting guy. He is to this day. And he had an idea for a website. And, frankly, many people have ideas for lots of things, and most people don't take action on them. And again, this was just a stranger that I met for 45 minutes one time, and just flittered into my head a couple months later. Oh, I should shoot a text to that guy, Jonathan, see what he's up to, see if he ever started that website. So I sent him that message, and we talked about lightning bolts before. He said that was the lightning bolt that essentially changed his life. And he said, well, no, damn, to himself, I didn't do anything. I haven't taken action. And he literally in that next 24 hours bought ChooseFI.com on his own and created a couple of articles so that he could then respond to me the next day and say, yeah, I did. I started this website and here are the articles. Check it out. And that was, pretty wild. And then maybe a month later, he shot me another message and said, hey, I've got this idea. I'd love to run past you. Let's grab coffee. And I forget, we went to Starbucks or Panera or something. And he had this idea for a podcast. And this was late 2016. Yeah. So it was probably September to November of 2016, thereabouts. And it just sounded fun. At that point, I doing my thing with the Travel Miles 101. I was keeping busy and that was growing, but it just sounded like a fun thing. And there was no downside, right? There was no downside to starting a podcast. The worst that happened is nobody ever listened and nobody would be the wiser. So we started it. And we actually went down to the very first Camp FI, which subsequently has been Camp FI, but Stephen Boyer, it was Camp Mustache Southeast back then in Florida. So that was January of 2017. We had obviously we were nobody. Nobody there was no podcast. Essentially, it was just getting started. And in fact, like everybody's like, oh, isn't the financial independence podcasting space like saturated? How are you ever gonna get your name out there? It was like, I think there were maybe 3 other FI podcasts at that point. But we thought that we could do something different. We thought our different stories were interesting, and our backgrounds. And yeah, that camp, we met a guy named Joshua Sheets, who has a podcast. I don't know if he still does it, called Radical Personal Finance, which kind of different little personal finance podcast, but it was very popular at the time. And we were on his show. He basically, I think he recorded like 15 different episodes that weekend, and we were one of them. And I mean, that probably got us our first X number of hundreds of listeners, whatever it was, 500 or something like that listeners. And that was the big break at that point, because as you both know, podcasting is kind of crazy, with the numbers can be pretty small and then just start, like you said, Bill, growing exponentially. But you need that base, and you need a community that is involved. And I think that was how we always conceptualized ChooseFI. Was we call it the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. And we've meant that since the very, very beginning. It's the audience and the community, more importantly, not the audience, but the community is everything. It could never have just been about me and Jonathan, because I think we're both reasonably intelligent. We know our stuff, but man, if it was just about us and we were the experts from on high, that would get pretty tedious pretty quick. And it just always was more than that. And I think that's why ChooseFI has grown so significantly. And yeah, I mean, I can't say that we ever had that crazy moment where we were on Good Morning America and we got 500,000 new listeners, which is great, actually. It's grown by word of mouth. It's grown by people listening to it. It potentially changing their lives for the better. Like I think you both have said, it's done. And people then feel that it's accessible. I think that's another thing that you guys are doing so well, is like our show was accessible. It wasn't boring. It wasn't super high level, nerdy finance stuff. It was 2 guys trying to live better lives with their families. I think people can get behind that. And when the community got involved and they started spreading it, it just kept growing. And again, we never had a lightning bolt moment, but it just grew 10 to 20% every single month for 5 years, more or less. I think at this point, we've had something like, we're over 60 million cumulative downloads. And it's, we have local groups in 300 plus cities, probably 350 cities across the world. And it's just become something really pretty remarkable.
How did you manage the overwhelm and the growth? I mean, 2 guys just met each other, and it does blow up with organic growth. It's only been 6 years. It's huge. It's made such a difference in the world and personally in so many lives. How did that happen? How did you create a team?
Yeah, it's always been a balancing act. And I think it continues to this day. And I think a lot of us, and this transcends my little story here, and certainly even entrepreneurship, is just a lot of us have a lot of fun and interesting things coming inbound. And it's very easy to say yes to things. It's very easy to say yes to just about everything because it all sounds fun. It sounds interesting. It sounds like it could move the needle. And I think I would counsel people to just be very judicious with that word yes. I think we have a finite amount of time and resources and energy, and I think it's important to kind of get to the essence of something. And I think it's funny, Bill, because I'm gonna fast forward your question. Is at this point, I've actually started culling things from the ChooseFI universe because I think it's important to really cut to the essence of where you add value. And I think we did a lot of things because, again, we thought we were going to run a conference, and we thought we had book publishing, and we still publish the existing books. But I think at this point, we're probably not going to be publishing new books, and just lots of things, merchandise on the website, just all of these things that were easy to say yes to. And I think at the heart, we are a podcast and my newsletter. And those are the 2 really important things. It's easy to get bogged down in, should I do Twitter? Should I do Pinterest? Should I do Instagram? And none of that, like we've always tried, and it's just, it hasn't been the concerted effort and the quality level I think that the podcast and the newsletter have been. So this is probably not the answer you were looking for, actually, Bill, or expecting, but that actually is where I am now. Is we're really trying to be smarter and to understand that, hey, we want to live our lives and still add a ton of value to the world, but how can we get the most out of that with maybe not the minimal input, certainly, but like a rational amount of inputs? Because honestly, I could sit here 24 hours a day just answering the emails that I get, because I get amazing emails and it kills me that I can't respond to every single one of them. I do try to read every single one of them, but I have 1,000 emails sitting in my inbox that I've already earmarked as these are important and I'd love to get back to them. I have 1,000. So that's never going to happen. I could, like I said, I could spend 24 hours a day, but I can't do that because I want to see my family. I want to go to the gym. I want to travel. I want to just live life. So I think I've become, and frankly, the COVID pandemic has been clarifying for a lot of us. I think I've become much more clear on that in the last couple of years. And thankfully, we do have people helping us behind the scenes. And, we mentioned people like Becky, your son, Stephen, who helped so much at the foundation. And we're trying to get the most out of what we can, basically. So again, probably not the answer you're expecting, Bill, but I hopefully provide some insight into my thought process.
How big is the team behind ChooseFI at this point?
I mean, it's just a handful of us, really, ultimately.
Wow.
So yeah, we're definitely, all told, there's probably 5 to 8 people who are tangentially involved. So it's not that big of a team.
That's amazing. I never would have guessed that given its size. And I have to ask, because things have changed in the last year for you, what's it like since Jonathan left?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is I see Jonathan more often now than I did over the last 5 years. So I work out with Jonathan 4 days a week, every morning for four mornings a week for 2 hours. So I see Jonathan way more now than ever. We're still great friends, business partners on ChooseFI, though I don't conceptualize it like that, but obviously by any definition we are. And he's still doing stuff behind the scenes at ChooseFI. He's working on, as you guys could imagine, just all sorts of fun things, like trying to level up our website and learn about AI and all this stuff, and how he can do things. He's we've talked a bunch about that Talent Stacker Salesforce program that he wound up partnering with Bradley Rice on that to help grow that. And it's been an amazing thing for the financial independence community. I think we've had 500 ChooseFI members get not only sign up for that, but get jobs. So it's radically helping people. So the not so fun answer is things are great with Jonathan. Like everything's wonderful. We talk every single day, and the only thing that's different is he's not on the podcast. So yeah, it's pretty great. But he always has input. And actually, our brainstorm this morning, I'm giving you a potentially breaking news here, is we might have something coming up where Jonathan and I are back together in front of the microphone. So stay tuned. Ooh. I'm not. It literally happened this morning at the gym, so it's just in its very early stages, but that might come to fruition.
Well, breaking news on Catching Up to FI. That's an awesome give. All right, we're coming to the end of our podcast, and we haven't talked as much about late starting. Do you think in the community of financial literacy, financial independence, that's an under-addressed issue? Do you think ChooseFI has addressed it?
Yeah, I have a complicated and mixed feeling about this, in the sense that, well, I think just seeing how your podcast and your community have grown just in these early stages, it's very clear that there's a desire for this information. Okay. So there are lots of people who feel like, regardless of what the definition is, who feel like they're starting late. And that's why I believe, and I've told you guys this both, aside from your podcast just being really, really interesting and great to listen to, is I think people need this information because they don't feel like they're getting it. So that said, while at ChooseFI, I haven't explicitly, there haven't been, I can't say I've done 20 episodes on people getting a late start to FI. I think, and I truly believe this is an important distinction. I think FI at its essence is just, it almost doesn't matter when you start, because it's the same mathematical equation. It's the same beginning steps you need to take. But I don't think that's relevant, honestly, which is funny in the sense that because it goes back to what we said before is the world runs on stories. So if people come to ChooseFI and they hear a story of a 24-year-old who had it all figured out, or the 35-year-old who hit FI and is off traveling the world, well, someone who's maybe getting that late start might just immediately say, oh, this isn't for me. Or I'm not seeing myself in this story, so I don't know if I can do this. Now, I think, frankly, if they got the kernel of truth of the story, or if they stuck around long enough and listened for 5 or 10 episodes, it's going to become very obvious very quickly that the message hits them the same as it hits somebody who's 22. Because I think at its essence, FI is pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's pretty simple. But that said, again, I don't think it's relevant because when somebody comes to catching up to FI, they know immediately this is my tribe, right? And that is worth its weight in gold. That's why I think this has caught on so significantly. So yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is I think we definitely have provided information for those people, but we haven't explicitly done it. And that's why I think what you're doing is such a wonderful service.
Brad, I wanted to just ask you about the resources that you have on ChooseFI. Your content made such a difference for Stephen and I over time. Your episodes talked about things that I'd never heard of. So can you just give us a quick rundown of what folks can find on ChooseFI.com?
Yeah, so I'm going to potentially break other news here, which is
yes,
I get. This is the thing that I've been working on, which is cool. So yeah, we have a lot of resources, and actually, this is both a blessing and a curse in that we have 600 episodes, and I think honestly, and I say this humbly, like the podcast is like a or A+ level podcast. I think there's world-changing and life-changing information in that podcast, but you can't tell somebody sit down and listen to 600 episodes. Give me the next half a year of your life. It's going to change everything. So we have tried to put together an essential listening guide that you can find just right at our homepage. We have a Financial Independence 101 course, which we've referenced before, which Stephen helped get off the ground. That you can find at our site or at the foundation website, ChooseFI.com/FI101. You can find my newsletter, which is something I personally write every Monday. It goes out Tuesday morning. I wait until the absolute last minute, and as procrastinators across the world do. So I personally write that. You can find all of our podcast episodes. So, I mean, there is a wealth of information. But I think two things that I've always been frustrated is, like I said, those 600 episodes, they're just kind of lost out there in the ether of there's no way to collate and curate that information. So one of the beautiful things now is that these AI resources are enabling almost exactly what I've wanted for years, which is a way to curate and put together a lot of this information that may otherwise have been lost. So we're working with a company called DEXA. So it's DEXA.ai. I don't know if ours will be launched or live by the time this goes live, but it should be pretty darn close. They actually are really going through all of our episodes and with the transcriptions and loading it into an AI that can basically give you answers to any questions that you're looking for just in the 600 episodes of ChooseFI. So it's not going to go out to the other world knowledge. If it was never talked about in ChooseFI, it's not going to be in that AI answer. So I'm hoping that could be, hey, I have a question about the Roth IRA conversion ladder, or maybe better, college hacking. Like, what are all the times ChooseFI has talked about a little tip to save money on college? Well, Becky and Bill, I couldn't tell you the answer to that, right? Because I haven't gone through 600 episodes and tried to catalog it. But an AI that has those 600 transcripts put in there can find it essentially instantly. And that's the kind of thing that I have dreamed of for years. And the tech is finally catching up. So we are right at the precipice of that, which I am extraordinarily excited about, as you can certainly tell. And then the other thing is, this is a project that's ongoing, so I'm going to not promise too much, but I am personally now creating hundreds of videos to put on our website that I'm calling them the 5 Fundamentals series. So it's like every single thing. Like yesterday, I recorded one on just something like the rule of 72. That's something that I probably have like in passing mentioned 10 times across 600 episodes. And maybe I've went into it, but again, it's lost out there. If somebody hears that and they have no idea what it is, well, what if I had 300 videos on ChooseFI.com that were every little thing that I could think of or I came across, and I just create a video on it? I can do that so almost effortlessly at this point. So that's the big thing that I'm working on. So yeah, I mean, if all goes well and you come to ChooseFI.com 6 months from now, there are going to be hundreds of these videos, and there'll be this interface with this AI that is just, again, all of our episodes. So it could be a radically transformed experience. And I think it's pretty good today, frankly.
As always, ChooseFI is on the cutting edge. Using AI is fascinating. I love it. And I look forward to that curation. We're finally coming to the close of the podcast, and we are about late starters. I want to hear from you if you have your top 2-3 tips in particular for late starters, curating all of the knowledge you've accumulated over 600 episodes.
Oh, yeah, that is a good one. I think I'm going to give just broader advice is you have to take action. You cannot beat yourself up about mistakes you've made in the past. So I think it is very, very easy, regardless of whether you made those mistakes like I did with real estate speculation in my early 20s and made a massive, massive error that cost me potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars compounded over time. Or if it's something that you're still doing, right? Like you can't beat yourself up because the past is the past, and ruminating on it and being frustrated and mad at yourself, it simply doesn't do anything. So what you can do is you can join a community. You can join Catching Up to FI community on Facebook. You can join the ChooseFI community. And you can see a community of people across the world who are taking action to make their lives better, one day at a time. And you can realize that, oh, wow, I can radically transform my life for the better if I just commit to this. And it starts with, as we said, it starts with saving money. This is not like a live a life of deprivation or be a miser, but you start accruing that power from that very first day that you are in the black, as they say. And of course, I was talking about the 5 fundamentals videos, but when you're saving money, when you're not, as they say, in the red, which is meaning your expenses are more than your income. So when you're to the good and you start accumulating savings and then you start investing and you start learning, it's a snowball that just becomes fun. You will be shocked at how your life can transform in a fairly abbreviated period of time, especially maybe for late starters who are probably at their highest earning period, right? I can't say that as a broad statement, but you have people getting started in their 40s and 50s, and they're probably in the absolute highest earning years. So as we say, they have a bigger shovel to potentially maybe shovel out this problem a little bit. So I think it's easy to look at, oh, here are the negatives. I'm getting started late. I can't do this. I'm so far behind. Or you could reframe it and say, oh, wow, but I'm making 4 times more money than when I was 22. And maybe if I make these couple changes, I can have this massive amount of savings per month, and this can really accelerate. So yeah, I guess that would be my advice from a real high level.
Yeah, it's great advice, because an episode coming out this weekend, as a matter of fact, with Amy Caruso, she talks about our moniker late starting, and often the emphasis is on late, when she says the emphasis should be on starting and the positive sides of things. I love it. The other thing I want to mention that you bring up all the time on your podcast is the compounding of marginal gains, getting 1% better every day, every week, every month. And you can compound your time. You can compound so many things, your health. If you just try and be a little bit better every day, get started and compound, correct?
Yeah, you bet. And yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about that the other day with my health. And it's, I can obviously point to some significant ones with different fitness programs and such, but man, it's just hundreds of little things, like down to the type of soap we use, down to the blackout curtains that I have, down to, it's all of these things. When you just start that incremental improvement, and you'll be shocked. I mean, I look at pictures of myself from when I got married, and I'm like, I can't recognize that person. It's that wasn't a short time ago, but it was 17 years. And I mean, I was in my mid 20s. And I think, frankly, I look dramatically better now than I did then. And it's because I've taken care of myself, certainly over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's been a journey, and I'm still on a journey. I think that's part of what's fun about life, is you're constantly learning. It's never settled. You're just trying to do better the next day. And I think that to me is exciting.
Well, you can't enjoy your money unless you take care of your health. You may have your FI number, but I see so often people that delay gratification until retirement, and then they come into my ER and find out they have cancer. You just have to live your life now, balance your life, save for the future, but enjoy the present. I have a 50-50 proposition where you save one income, you live on 50%, you live a balanced life, and you reach where you want to go, no matter where you start. Right, Becky?
That's right. Well, we have so much enjoyed having you here today, Brad. Where can people reach you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I guess the easiest place to find me is just, since you're listening to this podcast, just search Choose, like make a choice, ChooseFI. I'm on Twitter at Brad ChooseFI. And really the best way is to get on my newsletter. So ChooseFI.com/subscribe, where you could just go to our homepage, and it's just in the upper right-hand corner. It says Brad's FI Weekly or something silly like that. Sign up for that newsletter. Like I said, I send it out every single Tuesday. And when you hit reply, it literally comes to me. So I read every single email. I try to respond to as many as I can. Like I told you, I've got about 1,000 left over. But yeah, that is the absolute best way. And I correspond with as many people as I can in a given week. And it's wonderful. It's amazing to see people's wins, see what their questions are, to help support them, and just to be there as part of this community. And I think that's what we're doing here, is we are building a worldwide community.
Well, it's amazing that you talk about the accidents and the luck in life, and how you met Jonathan, and all the texting and meeting virtually because you were on a podcast. Actually, Becky and I met the same way. I heard her on your podcast. It resonated with me because that was my story. I reached out to her, and we did a Facebook Live, which I'd forgotten until she reminded me. And we had never met in person. We corresponded virtually when, I came up with the idea for this podcast. I needed an accountability partner. I needed a co-host. I needed to, coalesce community. Becky kindly responded back, was encouraged by the idea. The rest is history, and we're enjoying the ride. We only met in person at Economy recently. And, we're going to see each other. She's become my best friend, or one of my best friends, in such a fast amount of time. So it's really amazing what you can do when you jump into a community.
That's right.
Yeah. What a world. What a great story. What a great story. Well, again, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing for the FI community. And yeah, looking forward to coming back on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. We'll have you back. And thank you again for sharing this time with us. Our audience should listen to the whole thing. Hopefully you made it to the end, or broke that up on your own, because I think this is going to run in its entire length.
I was going to say, it might be a two-parter. But,
all right, Brad, take care. Have a great day.
Okay. Thanks again.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
We are not lawyers, financial advisors, accountants, or tax experts. Please consult your own professional advisors before making any important decisions. Our content is for entertainment and education purposes only.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to FI.